Welcome back to another live stream. We're gonna do Q&A today. We got Mike Radzicki answering all your economic questions. I've been working on, you guessed it, another model. I wanted to take the new Keynesian DSGE model and make a system dynamic model out of it. I thought it would be pretty fun. I wanted to check out micro foundations and how they translate into a nonlinear dynamic model in continuous time. And it's been interesting. It's going to be a project for my Patreon, so it should be fun. You know, all that stuff. So stay tuned. Make sure you put your questions in the chat. I'll bookmark them. We'll get Mr. Mike Radzicki to answer them. Stay tuned.
You are now relearning economics.
Hope you are well. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell, leave your comments underneath the video if you're watching this later. And also put your comments in the chat, say hello. If you got a question, put Q in front of it or question and then ask your question. I'll make sure to bookmark them all. And we'll get to them as we go through the show. We'll let everybody kind of start rolling in. Mike's not here yet, but I do have this DSGE model that I've reinterpreted or translated into a system dynamic model just because I wanted to see the causal structure. I'm going to build it out more. It'll end up on my Patreon, some sort of project on the side. I had put out my working paper a few weeks ago, and I described the new Keynesian three equation DSGE model. And then, of course, postulated an alternative to that model, system dynamic model, and then reduced it to three equations. So basically into a steady state model. And then it removed the nonlinear behaviors and replaced them with linear behaviors. And then you can calibrate with this three equation model, the larger model, as a replacement to the three equation new Keynesian DSG model, which is very much an introductory type system for, economics. Ralph, good to see you. If you're in the chat, make sure you say hello. We'll give some time for people to roll in. Steve is not here today. He's gallivanting in the Caribbean right now. World traveler that he is. It's to be expected. He doesn't always make it. But let's kind of maybe show the system itself. Ralph, I got to take your comment down here. Hello, Germany. Welcome, Henrik. Good to see you. So let's put up this model here. I'll share my screen. And so this is a representation. I'll make this full. This is a representation of the new Keynesian DSGE model, the three equation model. But it's translated into a system dynamic model. I'll build it out. It'll have Euler equations eventually, but this is the, base level model. And basically you have essentially four variables. So you have X, which is your output gap. You have pi, which is your actual inflation. You have E, which is your expectations, which I had to do some fancy things to get forward-looking expectations and a backward-looking path-dependent system dynamic model, but I'll show that in a second. And then you have your actual interest rate. Now, these models, I don't really believe in them, and we'll kind of go through the variables. For instance, we've got a natural real rate. I don't believe in natural rates. There's no such thing, especially in dynamic systems. You have a natural real rate, right? Okay, so don't believe in that. We have like a Taylor rule built here, which dictates, what the interest rate should be, right? And then you have variables controlling that. So like an output gap coefficient, depending on what the output gap is, the interest rate will react to it. an inflation coefficient. So depending on what inflation is, the policy rate will react to it. I made sure I just added, all the variables that are in the new Keynesian DSG model. So your intertemporal elasticity of substitution. Now, just to be clear, economists make up these long words to sound sophisticated, but it's just a basic constant parameter. And you got your beta variable, which is your discount factor. So that's basically saying how much do firms rely on their future expectations. This is close to 1, so they rely on them. And then you have your Phillips curve slope, which is basically a nominal rigidity. Again, just it's just a multiplier. It's nothing fancy. Now, the thing with dynamic models is I'm converting this from a discrete equation, a difference equation model, and it's in discrete time. So I've had to convert it to continuous time, and I've had to add integrals. So they accumulate over time. So essentially, I didn't say, like explicitly say, but each one of these equations are developing a target. So let's say, just call this target. And because I have this in equilibrium, the target probably will match. But essentially, the equations are making a target, and then I'm the system, because system dynamics is converging. It's about the change over time. The evolution of the system over time. I'm taking that target and I'm putting a leg into the system, and then I'm going to match this eventually will match the target. And so each one of these 4 variables have targets. I just haven't explicitly named them in the model. Then with a time constant, the model will converge to that target. Now, these are some of the things that I had to do to kind of convert a DSG model into a system dynamic model. I had to add some of my own stuff to make this work, because they're essentially 2 different types of modeling techniques. And Ralph, yeah, well, we can definitely address the invalid assumptions. Like I went to the first, when there is no such thing as a natural real rate. And even if there is some sort of, if you want to term it a natural rate, even though the central banks are essentially setting the rates, even if there is some sort of equilibrium rate in a dynamic system, that's going to be changing all the time. So to make a constant like they do in DSG models, where they dictate what's the natural nominal rate and what's the natural real rate, that's fallacious in itself. So those are some of the issues. Now, structurally, all of the rest is sort of fine to me from a structural standpoint, Ralph. It's essentially a dynamic model. We have feedback loops. Now, are these assumptions correct? Well, obviously, if there's an output gap, that's going to affect the way central banks react to changing their policy rate. So that assumption in itself, even though it's very broad, I can take it at face value. Obviously, the central bank, the policymakers, are going to react to what the actual inflation rate is at the time, and they're going to react to that. So I can take that at face value. Yeah, there are expectations in the system, and it does dictate how the system is going to behave. In this case, expectations affect output, and they affect inflation itself, where expectations are formed in this simple model. Let's bring on Mike. I think he's in the background. Mike,
Hello.
how you doing? How you doing, Mike?
Okay, just got out of class.
Oh, that's good. Now, before we get to any questions, I'm just kind of running through this DSGE model. I've translated into system dynamics. Be a Patreon project or something like that in the future. So I'm just kind of going through it, and we'll make sure people put in some questions, and then you're going to answer questions, Mike. So everybody, make sure if you got a question, put Q in front of it. If it's for Mike, and we'll make sure we address it. So, Ralph, back to your question. Yeah, there's the things like a natural rate is something I don't really agree with, either nominal or real. But there are structurally the way I've converted this model. Sure, I can believe in those assumptions. There's some feedback loops. The main thing, what I struggled with kind of building this model is, well, system dynamic models are backwards looking. We have forward expectations. Um, and so I had to kind of address that. So the dynamics you get out of a system dynamic model is basically its leg. So I create a target and then I match it in the system and I close the gap in that target, and this is just a first order smooth. That's fine. That's fine for dynamics, but the DSG models and rational expectations explicitly say it's forward looking expectations, not backwards. But we can work with that in system dynamics, and we have what's called a trend function. And a trend function is basically a second order smooth that you take. So you take your first order, your second order smooths. So your first order minus your second order. You take your time constant and you multiply it against your second order, and then you divide the two, and you get a trend function. And that's your first step into like forecasting a forward-looking type function in system dynamics. Mike, it's called what is the actual term now? I'm forgetting. That'll come back to me. But anyways, you can then take that a little bit further, and you got a forward-looking expectation. I can demonstrate that. Extrapolate into the future would be the correct term. So that basically you start with a first order smooth, add the second order smooth, and do the equation there. You get your trend, and then you can do an extrapolation equation. So if I run this model and we introduce a shock, so we run it, the shock enters the system, and then it converges back to equilibrium. In system dynamics, we use first. So if you look at the red dotted line, that's the first order. So if the actual inflation, the signal, is the black line, we add a first order smooth to it with a time constant dictating what that smooth is. And then you've got a second order smooth, again with a time constant that dictates what that curve is. These are all backwards looking. This is definitely not giving forward looking expectations. So it's lagging. These expectations are lag behind the actual input of the system. But with a trend function, you can actually get ahead. And so that's what I've used in this case. So it's actually leading the actual inflation, actual inflation. And so that's how I got around it. And the system, is it perfect? No, but this is system dynamics. There's no way I can one for one it. But it's close enough. So it gives you, ultimately, this runs exactly like a DSG model, the three equation model. So you introduce cost push shock, shocks the system. The system will either return to the exact same equilibrium, or I can change some parameters and it'll reach a new equilibrium. So obviously in the three equation model, it's not looking at actual output. It's just looking at the gap from a steady state of output. Then you got your actual inflation, interest rates, and inflation expectations. And essentially all it is a supply and demand model. So in new Keynesian DSG models, it's not your traditional aggregate supply and aggregate demand. You're actually kind of looking at your output gap and its effect on the price change. And so here you can see I introduced the shock. During that shock, it would have reached equilibrium there, but the shock ended. And so the actual equilibrium for the output gap and inflation's right there. And that's all it is. For me, it's not very interesting. I'll eventually add the Euler equations and stuff, but you can set. So Ralph, you were talking about the invalid assumption. So one of them's the natural rates. And so we can kind of actually address that. So if I stop the model, we'll take out the cost push shock, and we will, let's say, change. So we have our real rates. Let's go and put this up to 4%. This is our natural real rate. So now they're not balanced anymore. This model will start out of equilibrium and converge to a new equilibrium. So we'll run it. And as you can see, it's instantly out of equilibrium. And it'll find its next level of equilibrium somewhere along here. The cool thing, though, is when you take a DSGE model and you convert it, translate it into a system dynamic model, it starts feeling like an old Keynesian multiplier accelerator model and kind of behaves that way. So it's found its new equilibrium levels because I've got a mismatch between my natural rate and my nominal natural rate, and it finds a new equilibrium path. You can take a look at your supply and demand curve and you can see how they've shifted, and ultimately your equilibrium would be right there. So it means now inflation's probably around 2%. The output gap's positive, and so that's basically a DSG model, and that's how they work. And I'll be adding more things before it gets on my Patreon. So this is very much the base case for a DSGE model. And obviously, if you want to expand it, like central bank, like the Fed Reserve, the New York Fed Reserve DSGE models is quite extensive. Same with the ECB policy model. It's quite extensive. So I'll extend it more. And the ultimate goal here, I believe, so everybody here is a Steve Keynes fan, and he rejects equilibrium. He rejects neoclassical economics, and by extension will reject new Keynesian economics. But I do think a bridge needs to be extended, and obviously mainstream economics won't extend to heterodox economics, although when a good heterodox idea penetrates economics, it's often just adopted by mainstream economics, which is great. That's the whole point of challenging, orthodox theories. But ultimately, if system dynamicists or old Keynesians that would start using system dynamics or dynamic systems to maybe push an old school Keynesian model that's adapted, that's more relevant to current times, you've got to kind of speak on the same terms as a person that builds new Keynesian models. So I think it's important to try to replicate their work that they do in their domain and do it in our domain. And I think it can be fruitful. Now, whether mine is fruitful or not, that's highly debatable, but it'll end up on my Patreon, and from there, whatever happens. And I'll stop sharing. We'll bring up, there's Mike. How you doing, Mike?
Okay.
Good stuff. How was class?
I had a good time. The kids were, it's Friday afternoon. I didn't say anything else.
What happens? What's Friday afternoon?
Oh, they all are looking out the window wanting to do something other than economics.
Jeez. So, that's the first thing I woke up to this morning. I was thinking about economics.
Yeah. Well, some of us do. A lot of these kids they want to mix chemicals and build robots, and they're just taking a social science class to fulfill a degree requirement, and they're like, blah blah blah, yeah, blah blah blah. It's not chemistry. Is what it is.
Everybody, if you got your questions, make sure you put Q in front of them. Mike is here. He's our resident system dynamic expert, and guess what? He's an economist too, so he blends the two together. So if you're thinking about economics as a system, you've got a systems economic question, this guy right here is the guy to ask. So get those questions in. Well, here's one. Let's just address Ralph, and let's get Mike's opinion here on this question. I believe Warren and others, I'm assuming you're speaking about Warren Mosler, and others would argue that the natural rate should be 0%, or possibly slightly higher to avoid deflation. So, Mike, obviously there's the post Keynesian thought that there's just not a natural rate. There's no such thing. MMT would say that the natural rate is just simply zero unless there are policymakers setting it above zero. What's your opinion?
I think the natural rate concept is old. I think it's more the non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment is the more modern, concept, that whatever the unemployment rate has to be, where you're not causing pressures on inflation. If you push it below that, you're going to start accelerating inflation. So I think that's the more modern rendition of the concept. They're similar concepts, but that's so. Where is that? We don't know for sure. When I was a student years ago, it was 5%. It's probably less than that now. You got people working in the gig economy part. It's really hard to nail it down. I do think that there is some good unemployment. I tell the students, like, you graduate and you have several possible job offers, and you're, maybe I'll take it, but I want to look a little more so I match up well. Or my significant other is taking a job in California. I'm going to move with that person there and look for a job when I get there. I think that's good unemployment, right? You want to match up to where you're at, or it's a short run thing. So there is some natural rate or good rate of unemployment, I guess, that's not necessarily zero. You could make it zero in a model, but I think really the issue is, to the extent there's a short run Phillips curve, are we going to push the systems past this point where inflation starts to take off? I guess that would be the concept. And I don't know what that number is, and it's hard to nail it down.
Yeah, I would argue that number, if you build a robust enough system, like maybe a system dynamic model, that number is out there, variable, like fluctuating. Might be that hypothetical number out there that if you had all the information of that system and you could model that whole system, that there would be an ideal number out there, but you would always be trying to target it, and it would always be moving in the system, so you could never actually. So let's say the target is 3.5%, and you had this perfect model of the economy. I know that's a stretch, and so you saw it. And now I've got to make policy decisions. So I go to the FMOC board, and we make the policy decision by 2 weeks from now. And by that 2 weeks, the system has changed, and it's a new target, this new natural rate, and you miss it. And so now you're targeting something that's changed. And so this is, again, a lag kind of thing, a time constant, and you're actually introducing a different fluctuation in the system. It'd just be kind of chaotic. So maybe for me, there might be a natural rate that you could define if you knew the system, but that rate would always be changing. And in that sense, it's kind of useless to try to find it, because then you're trying to target it and you can never catch it. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I tell the kids, I can design an economy with a zero rate of unemployment. When you reach employment age of 16, I can script you into the military. It's mandatory, and I'll assign you a job. Now we have a zero rate of unemployment, and you work until you die. I wouldn't want to live in that society, but you could create an actual system as well as a mathematical system that has zero. And you're right, lags make it very hard to control any dynamic system. I'm told the story by John Sturman that he had a student once who had been a helmsman in the Navy on an aircraft carrier, and they were studying oscillation. And he said, and the effect of lags causing oscillation. And he said, that's exactly what a helmsman on an aircraft carrier learns, that a new guy drives the carrier through the waves, like the water, like that, because you're overcompensating because of the delays between when you turn the helm, the wheel, whatever it is, and when the rudders respond and then the ship responds. And a veteran can compensate for the lags. They learn the lags and they don't overcorrect as much. So a veteran helmsman will drive the ship straighter through the water. So lag's very important, and it makes it hard to control a dynamic system. So yeah, if you're trying to hit a target, by the time the corrective action gets there, it's probably too much or too little, and then it continues to correct. And that's with a stationary target. Now, if the target's moving for some reason, who knows? It's even more crazy. So yeah, I mean, you do the best you can. Someday when robots run everything and AI runs everything, maybe it's a different story. But in modern times with human beings, approximate is about as good as you're going to be able to do.
We got Tony. Well, Tony's got a statement for you. Tell all the engineers in your class that there's an engineer in this live stream every week, because he knows that either we deal with economists or they'll dominate our lives. Do you tell your students that?
Yeah. So yeah, thanks for that, Tony. So when I talk to high school seniors who have applied to WPI and been accepted, but they have not yet agreed to come to tech, they have a day and their parents come and whatever. And I'm asked to go and talk about our department, studying system dynamics, economics, social sciences, and, convince them that they might want to do something with our department, or WPI is a good place to go because you can also do social science, whatever. And I said, well, what do you want me to say? And they're like, we don't care. Just say something, figure out something. So the thing that I've done that works pretty well is to say, look, there's kind of two kinds of students who come to a polytechnic. The first kind, I'm going to lump everybody into engineering, although there can be natural, kids who study physics and stuff. Let's just call it engineers. You got the engineers who all they want to do is they want to mix chemicals or build a robot or make a circuit or write code or whatever. And they want to do an extremely deep dive on whatever that molecule is or whatever that robotic arm is or whatever the case may be, recycling batteries, whatever, with a million things going on. And they don't care about anything else. Everything else is noise to them. And we need people like that to do an extremely deep dive on a medicine. Make me a friggin' medicine that can cure whatever, and don't worry about the other stuff. But on the other hand, in order to solve the world's great problems, the wicked problems and grand challenges of the world, you need to have people who understand the technology, but also understand the interaction of the technology with the economics, the marketing, adoption and diffusion of the technology, the regulatory environment, the politics of it, the sociology of it, the conflict between the ceremonial way of doing things, the traditional way, and the new way, so on and so forth. And I give some good examples of that. One would be we have an alum, Dean Kamen, who created, among other things, the Segway. If you're familiar with the Segway, it's this sort of two-wheeled gyroscope thing where you can kind of lean into it and drive around. But he's done a whole lot of other stuff, but that's what he's most famous for. And he invented him and his team invented a water purification box. Where you take any water of any disgusting whatever, you pour it in the top, and at the bottom comes out perfectly clean, and you can give it to an infant. And he said, how many lives we could save in the world if we could get this box in every village in the developing world? Because people drink dirty water, they get all sorts of diseases and whatever. And he said, my box works. I know the technology. I have no idea how to get this box, everywhere around the world. Well, he's found a solution. He works with Coca-Cola now, and they distribute Coke, but along the way, they bring the box and the replacement parts and whatever. So he's getting his technology. But, he was a technologist, but didn't understand or know about the other aspects. And of course, he's a genius, so he figured it out. But so the kind of engineer who would be interested in economics, system dynamics, whatever, psychology, that sort of thing, is really the kind of person who wants to not only understand the tech, but all the other stuff to get the technology adopted and diffused to address the world's grand challenges. And I'm often Forrester turned me on to this. I'll paraphrase what he said. And he used to quote B.F. Skinner, who famously said, I'm paraphrasing, if the ancient Greeks were magically transported to the present day, they would understand absolutely nothing about our technology, but they would understand absolutely everything about all of our socioeconomic problems, pollution, unemployment, all that stuff, because they haven't been solved. They're part of the world's grand challenges, wicked problems. And those are the things that require a systems approach, a holistic approach, a time-sensitive approach, an appreciation of lags between cause and effect and whatever. And that's not commonly taught. I mean, what you're doing, Ty, with this live stream is very unique, right? This is not normal, teaching this sort of stuff. So if you want, I could give one other example, real quick here. It's not necessarily an engineering example, but I'll tell a story. I've told this story in the past, but I think it's worth retelling. And that is with our educational system. My oldest son at one point he was a freshman in high school. He's 42 now, so this is a long time ago. But he had to do a big major project in the humanities, and he was assigned English. And somebody thought it was a good idea to combine the freshmen and the juniors in one giant sort of science fair or whatever you call it, where you have the tables set up in the gym and there's the three-sided poster board, and the judges come around and you explain whatever you've done and so forth, and they give out ribbons and what have you. And the juniors were going to do natural science, physics, biology, that sort of thing, and the freshmen had to do something in the humanities. And so my son was just not interested in this project, zero interest. And my wife says to me, something on the order of 2 weeks away from the deadline, look, this kid has to do something here, and I cannot get him to do anything. So I said, well, let me take a crack. So I said, I'm done. I said, what do you got to work in? He goes, English. I go, what do you got to do? He goes, I don't know, kind of anything in English. All right. Give me something. You like anything? No, I don't like anything. I said, you can't tell me you like absolutely nothing. I get it. Maybe it's not your thing, but he goes, well, I kind of liked Edgar Allan Poe. I'm like, okay. Tell me about it. And he goes, oh, I like The Raven, The Telltale Heart, The Pit and the Pendulum. He really liked that one. I'm like, all right. And I said, let's talk about systems thinking. Let's talk about behavior over time. Let's talk about feedback loops and causal loop diagram. And I taught him that you can teach anybody to draw arrows. And I said, reread those short stories, find me the feedback loops and behavior over time for each of the stories, and see if there's any commonalities in terms of the feedback loops among the stories. Put them on your poster board. Each of the three boards was one of the stories. He won he was the grand champion of the entire thing. And here's the point. The teachers, the judges were like, we've never seen anything like this. Taken Edgar, we've taught that forever. Nobody's ever approached it with this systems thinking lens or point of view. And yeah, it's a different way of viewing the world, thinking about problems. And it's really a leadership thing. The specialists, the specs in the Army, the lower level, are very specialized, right? They learn how to move an artillery piece, set it up, fix it when it's broken, fire it, clean it, whatever. And they're really, really good at a modest number of tests. They're specialized. The highest levels, the generals, are generalists. They have to figure out how the artillery integrates with the infantry, with the air cavalry, with logistics, communications, the allies, and whatever, and all the parts and how they're moving together over time and what the reaction of their enemy is going to be and whatever. They have to be systems thinkers, right? So in some sense, it's a leadership thing. Leaders are systems thinkers. And we just don't teach that in the United States. I don't know about Canada. I'm assuming it's kind of the same, or in the Western world. And we probably should.
Well, hockey is a very systems orientated game, and it moves through time, and it's very fast. So the systems are a change over time. The players are moving, and it almost looks chaotic. So, and it's a very Canadian type sport. So maybe we're better system thinkers than Americans.
Yeah, I think there's a lot. By the way, I think there's a lot of. I heard you. Although, who won the World Series? Sorry, but
That's a different, that is discrete. That is discrete time modeling. One event
It kind of
happens.
is actually, yeah.
Yeah.
It kind of is.
But I'll tell you though, so Doug, the MMT macro trader, we were actually
Yeah.
talking about building betting systems for sports. And I said the funnest ones to build are for baseball because you have a system state that you can look at all the states of the game in that moment. And whatever your theory is, you can then model from that point what could happen next, and maybe some statistical work. So from that perspective, maybe it's baseball's a little more dynamic. Maybe it's easier to do baseball, and it's the same with hockey because it's kind of like how you always say system dynamics is just a bunch of very, very small discrete time steps. And with baseball, you see them as very large because it's pitch by pitch by pitch, each system state. So maybe baseball is actually just as dynamic as any other sport. And I'm kind of going off the rails here.
I think in terms of, I think it would be difficult to model with system dynamics, a hockey game or a football game. I mean, you probably do something with agent-based modeling. But I do think that there's an area that would be profitable for somebody to look into would be teamwork and leadership and the interaction of players with different skills and personalities and whatever. And how do you get an optimal behavior of a team versus with different collections of individuals? And you find usually, I guess, that just because you have the 6 best athletes, 6 superstars on a team, like an all-star team, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the best team, right? Because everybody wants the ball, or everybody wants to be the leader, or whatever. I'm just making this up, but you get the idea. Versus some other configuration and set of incentives and whatever. So there's probably so a hockey team, a hockey club. How would you get the different lines to play together well? How should you configure your lines? What set of personalities and skill sets would you need to get the best performance? Probably there's something there.
Yeah, actually, I've thought about that too. As like you just said, you can have the best, 5 players on a line, but there would be feedback loops if you want to look at it from a system dynamic perspective between each player and the skill sets they bring on the ice at that time. And there would be, balancing feedback loops that would actually counteract one person's skill because another person's skill creates that negative feedback loop. And so in that perspective, there might be some things for system dynamics to look at, but you're right, agent-based modeling would be better. Tony says here, and I don't know if anybody's aware of this, that urban dynamics, so the Jay Forrester's urban dynamics was one of the inspirations for the original SimCity game. Now, Tony's talking about the Civilization game, which is a tycoon type life simulation game. It's just for the whole globe. SimCity was design your own little cities. I remember when I was in the 90s when I was young, I played SimCity 2000, and it was fun and fascinating to do. It is not system dynamic based, the game itself, and I have seen a few on Any Logic who they have a agent based component to that software package. People have simulated little small versions of SimCity, so it's more of an agent based type game. Mike, we've got a question here, and you're going to have to put on your MMT cap. Does the federal job guarantee eliminate the Phillips curve's significance? Mike, put your best MMT cap on.
You mean the short run, the trade-off between inflation and unemployment? Well, I guess it depends on how you're going to stabilize the system, right? They talk about employment of last resort programs, and Alba Lerner, one of the founders of modern monetary theory, and Dave Colander advocated for a market anti-inflation policy, a MAP, right? So installation of some of these buffer stock, if you will, programs or stabilization programs, a la Keynes in the proposed Bancorp system, or in Keynesian economics using the national budget to stabilize the system. Yeah, there might be, that might eliminate the short run trade-off, so to speak. I suppose it depends on how it would be designed. There's always going to be friction in the system, mismatches and whatever. When you look at employment programs versus, a guaranteed income program or something. So it just all depends on some of the details, but it might get rid of the traditional Phillips curve trade-offs and hence make it irrelevant. I don't think Bill Phillips would care. I think he was more interested in introducing, PID controllers into feedback controllers into macroeconomics and even his Phillips machine rather than the Phillips curve.
Yeah. Another interesting is Jay Forster sort of covered a job guarantee just on a smaller level in what we were just talking about, urban dynamics. And he showed actually that program can be quite counterproductive. Now, it wasn't a federally funded job guarantee program, and I was going to bring the model up, but I couldn't get it up before you started. Oh, that sounded terrible. I could not bring the model up on my laptop in time before Mike started talking.
Snickering.
So Jay Forster, and there were a couple conclusions. I can't remember exactly what they were. Oh, one of them was it actually brings an influx of population into that area.
Jobs and housing availability brings people in.
But there's not enough actual work ultimately in the private sector to support that, and you end up pushing up unemployment. So it's an unintended consequence. Now, the assumptions in urban dynamics, maybe some of it was off to today's standards, but it's something I would suggest any job guarantee people look in. There's the urban dynamics book is out there, and you can look at it. And I think Jay's talked about it in a few presentations.
I think there's, again, people want to learn how to do this modeling, where to look for places where you can find a niche. I think housing is a big one, particularly like a home insurance, rent versus buying, the mortgage business. Banks would be interested if you could, begin to say something, how to address the housing shortage. And at the same time, like in New York City, affordability is a big deal with housing. And there's a lot of businesses, I think, that would be, and a lot of industries that would be interested in new insights into that problem.
Yeah.
And, yes, there's been some work done by Jay and then others who have followed, but not a lot.
If you got any questions, make sure you put Q in front of the questions. We've got kind of a slow stream today, so help us out. Put some questions in the chat. Make sure you hit the notification bell, subscribe, then hit the notification bell, yada, yada, yada. Here's actually, no, that's the wrong one. And we'll just address this because we were talking about him. Listen, Wayne Gretzky just wasn't as good when he got to LA. Okay, he was in his prime in the 80s, late 80s and the early 80s when he was with Edmonton. And Edmonton had some good players. He was playing with Mark Messier, who was in his prime at the time. I'm trying to think of some other guys, and they're all slipping my mind. But when he went to LA, he didn't have those prime supporting characters around him. Although LA went to the Stanley Cup, lost to a Canadian team, the Montreal Canadiens, the last Canadian team in 1993 to win the Stanley Cup. We're still working on rectifying that. But you can look at it now. Connor McDavid, he's a great player. He's probably pushed Edmonton forward, but they couldn't beat Florida for the last a team from the swamps is beaten. Anyways,
you don't think of Florida as a hockey area, but
no, Florida is a strange market, even for baseball. So they do the spring training there. You would expect baseball would be hugely successful. And you look at Tampa Bay and the struggles they're having financially and ownership changes. And you'd figure it would be a great, great market. But Florida, it's interesting. So hockey went there because they just wanted to capitalize lower and lower on the latitudes to push the sport further and further. And they wanted to try to conquer, especially that the Florida market and the California market. That all kind of started in the early 90s, and you can see why hockey could struggle. But baseball, it's quite an interesting. Even the Marlins have this new stadium there, state of the art, and even they struggle. And you just figure, why? What's up with Florida?
That's weird.
Yeah. We have another one from Ralph. Here we go. What is this? Assuming your DSG model is based on Friedman's assumptions that causality goes from the demand side, monetary money, to the supply side, inflation, since validity of that is questionable. I don't know if I understand that question, Ralph. Mike, do you have some ideas there? Causality. So it's actually causality kind of goes. So basically, if I bring up the model, well, okay, let's just work this out. Let me bring up the model, and we'll just follow the feedback.
I mean, I guess you say more money in the system, more spending, or demand, more demand, same supply, or demand is increasing faster than supply, you get inflation. Maybe that's.
So the feedback loops is the output gap feeds into the actual inflation. And it's a positive reinforcing loop. So if output, if there's not enough output, then that would be inflationary. Inflation feeds into expectations. Expectations feeds back into inflation. So that's a reinforcing loop. Inflation also feeds into the policy rate, which is another reinforcing loop, and the interest rate, pardon me, and the interest rate feeds back into the output gap, which is a reinforcing loop. So this is, I don't know if you'd consider this a supply model. Well, I guess you would. And I don't know if new Keynesian DSG models explicitly were saying, you know what, we're taking Milton Friedman's monetarist arguments and building them in. They were actually taking in Keynesian arguments. So I think they come at it from a demand perspective, the new Keynesian model. I don't know how to answer your question, Ralph. If you can add more onto it, because I'm interested. I'm not smart like you, Ralph. So give me more. Let's take a look at. I'm going to put us full screen here. We got some other things here. From Best Guy, why don't you create a course package so people can learn economics in a standard way? Well, you just go to WPI. Mike will teach you. I am putting together a video series on how to use Ravel. And obviously I'm using macro as an applied example. So I am doing that for my Patreon. It's just I have so many things going on. So eventually that will be ready. But there are that's if you're talking about like looking at economics as a system. Oh, Mike does it. So if you want to travel to Boston, spend some money. Mike's not free. Or if you want to go to Bergen University, and is that Norway?
Yeah, Bergen, Norway.
Yeah, you can go to Europe. I'm assuming you're from the US, so WPI might be a better option for you. You got to pay them a bunch of
Well,
money and gonna have
yeah,
to find a place to
I
live.
think the larger. So we've thought about this, producing our own online courses, awarding badges. I can't award a degree. WPI has to do that. And we've run into, so when we've said we want to do that, WPI said, oh, great. We WPI will run it, and in cahoots with the System Dynamics Society. And we had it all the way where everybody finally agreed on who's going to do the marketing, who's going to teach the courses, what the division of the revenue is, all that stuff. And we had one course done, ready to go. And then the provost stepped in and said, "We're not doing this," out of nowhere. So we were like, well, all right then. Screw you. I mean, he didn't like the revenue division. And it's like, well, what would nice to know before we sewed everything. When I say we sewed it all up, we had people from the administration in the meetings. Now, not at the provost level, but they were the online education people. And so then you say, well, do it without the university, just do it on our own. And we could, but now we're paying for everything on the cost side. And is it worth it to, how many people would sign up to make it worthwhile? I don't know. I mean, we could put together an all-star curriculum. We could have Steve teach, Ty teach, I can teach, Khalid Saeed, Oleg Pavla, David in principle, we could have, a dozen people who do this stuff at a very high level, prepare nuts and bolts, just how do you do it in general courses, and then specifically, how do you apply it to economics, and then, turn it into games and group model build with experts and stakeholders to capture what they're telling you, start getting into industry level models, start redoing microeconomics the way we would do micro. So a firm sector looks like a firm and has an accounting sector and it has a marketing sector. And, we could do all of that. But is it worth it? Will anybody care?
Yeah.
5 people care, great, but that's not enough to make it worthwhile. It would have to be that there's a lot of people who care.
Yeah, that's one of my blocks. Like I've recorded these set of videos. I think about halfway. I set out kind of a structure. The issue is though, it's that was a lot of work. I'm sure I spent like 8 or 10 hours recording these videos. But I wouldn't want to maintain it after that because maybe only 5 people ever pay me to do it. Like, right? You just don't know. But anyways, we got another question here, and actually we'll both do this, Mike. Stump you, because the title of my live stream today is "Try to Stump Me" with your economic questions. Okay. Yeah. So here's the question: Stump you. Okay, name an assumption the neoclassicals are right about. Even better, something they claim backed by empirical evidence. Now, Steve would have a heyday if he was on the show today. I was reading this question and I was actually trying to think XDEM 68, and I, my mind was going to like the RBC model, so the real business cycle models, to see, okay, is there an assumption in those models? And just for everybody that wants to know, RBC models were the precursors to DSGE modeling. They just didn't have like rigidities in it, so like frictions and lags, and so everything adjusted instantaneously. Markets cleared instantaneously. And Mike was talking, I was thinking, well, there's nothing there. And then I started thinking about some like historical neoclassical economists, and really some came to mind, and I thought, okay, well, did they say any, do I put any quotes on my Twitter? And I'm like, nope, because I just don't find anything fascinating or factual. And I thought, well, empirically, is there something? And I thought, well, RBC models basically failed from the get-go. So like empirically, like their best mathematical work There wasn't much to it. And I thought, well, shit, I'm not going to be able to answer this question. And actually, you have stumped me. But then I thought, I got Mike here, and maybe Mike knows something about a neoclassical economist or the school itself, where maybe they were onto something and they were right. Maybe there is. Let's look at it from this perspective. There was the Keynesian to neoclassical transition in the late 60s, 70s, and the monetarists were mixed in there as well. Mike, were there some maybe an insight that the neoclassicals had that was worthwhile for economics that we even still use today, considering they did, overthrow the Keynesian kind of brand of the time? Is there something there that they were right about?
I guess my thought on this whole thing, the big picture question, is that I'm not inclined to say econ sucks, throw it all away. Because I do think standard economics has a lot of good stuff in it, a lot of concepts that I use all the time. For example, if I'm presented with a problem, I'm going to obviously think about stocks and flows and feedback loops and limiting factors, but I'm also going to think about supply and demand. That's often very useful. If you said, hey, I got a problem at my university where I'm sitting right now, can you help me address it with what you're modeling? So I'm going to start thinking about, well, what sectors, what stocks, what flows, but I'm also going to think about, does supply and demand help me? What do we supply? University supplies education. And what are the resources that do that? Well, you got faculty, buildings, administrators, whatever. How about the demand side? Well, you've got undergraduate students, graduate students, continuing ed. So, just the concepts of supply and demand are quite helpful. Price elasticity of demand, let's say, or supply. The sensitivity, if you're going to put a parameter in, you say a change in this causes a change in that. Well, how sensitive is it? And Ty, you like to also use table functions or continuous functions to represent these sorts of things. The steeper you make it, the more aggressive the change is. That's useful to me to think about, how I would model that, and it's just a useful concept. Do people act in their own self-interest? I think, economically speaking, by and large, yes, there are exceptions, and you can start to get into, is altruism acting in my self-interest? Well, maybe I get satisfaction from helping others, so yes, versus no, you're helping others. You get into that thing. But generally speaking, if using system dynamics, you would model using that concept. That's different from saying, I'm modeling such that my economic agents can solve constrained optimizations problems in their head and maximize their utility subject to a budget constraint in neoclassical. That's a little different. The concept is cool, but like how you implement it, I think can be different, based on the tool you're using and the perspective that you're using. The problem I think that neoclassical economists ran into, and this, again, it's path dependent. Why do we all in the U.S. drive, in Canada, drive on the right side of the road instead of the left side? There's path dependent. We're locked in. Everybody does it. Everything's set up to do it that way. We're not going to suddenly start driving on the left side of the road. And God help us if we did. Half of the people are driving on the other side of the road. Why don't we use the metric system very much? On and on. It's path dependent. So today the profession's locked in. But I think the original problem was that after World War II, economics went mathematical due to physics envy. And people like Samuelson, who were very mathematically inclined, and said, hey, we can make this into a real science like physics. So we're going to look for laws that hold at any time and any place. In China, Russia, or the US, in 1901, 1931, 2025, right? So they're timeless. They have to be simple because they are going to be devoid of context, of culture, of particular historical this or that. So they have to be like, Newton's laws, very simple, like the law of demand, this sort of thing. Law of diminishing marginal productivity, law of diminishing marginal utility. And you kind of get locked into this very narrow physics envy-ish way of doing economics, and it's regarded as the way to do it. It's in all the textbooks. The textbooks can't be wrong because they're textbooks. And so the next generation gets taught it, and you just get locked in. And so although some of the concepts are absolutely useful, the implementation is this obsession with being the physics of the social science, I think, or at least originally. And Forrester always used to say system dynamics, and really economics, is not a science like physics or chemistry. It's a profession like law and medicine. And that's a better way to think about it. Does a physician use biology? Yes, knowledge of biology, but they're not biologists, right? It's a profession. And I think that's a different way. You got to drop the we're natural scientists thing in economics, but I think it's locked into the profession.
Hold on here. Marty, I need you to come over here because you're yapping while I'm trying to do a live stream. Come here. Come here. Marty, come here. No, you come here. You lay down. You lay down. Okay. Now he's beside me. He's comfortable. Thinks he's guarding the house when a person walks by the front yard. It's funny. If he's inside, he thinks the rest of the world is his. When he's outside and he sees something he doesn't like, he usually gets scared. Quite interesting how this dog behaves. Yeah, that's you. You're a big guy, but you're a weirdo. Anyways, X says, here's the thing, is Steve brags me up a lot, but really, if I wanted to tell everybody something, it's not that I'm not smart. I'm not an academic. I think outside of the box. But what I would say is you can take Steve's software, you can take Mike's knowledge on system, or maybe even Stella or Vincem, right? And you can, what I would hope is that if, let's say I can do it, if I can do it, X, you could do it, right? So Steve says that because he's nice to me. I don't know why. Maybe because I always used his software and he brags me up. But the what Steve's actually saying is, if he said that to you yesterday, maybe you were in his school or something, that actually means you can do it. And so that's what Steve's saying. It's not that I'm smart. It's that you can do it too. Well, that means I'm saying you're not smart either. You're smart, X, and so you can do it too.
I like Tony's comment. Dogs are a reflection of their owners.
Marty. Well, now Marty is a pretty cool dog, actually. He is a pretty cool dog, but he has some quirks about him. What's one of the things I do? And he runs upstairs. So I've got 3 remote controls, right? I got a sound system remote, and Roku remote, in our living room. If I pick up one of them, it has a certain click, and he's out of here. He's gone. He's upstairs, sleeping on my bed, right on my pillow, getting a stink all over it. So he has his quirks. But other than that, he's a Tony. He's a good dog, and I'm a good person, bud. If you got questions, though, make sure you put them in the chat. Mike, go ahead.
Just a comment. When I came in from class, you were talking about forward-looking expectations and the trend function and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So, expectations or the modeling thereof is a horribly important area of economics and macroeconomics, right? Because a lot of economic decisions are not made on the basis of what is the state of the system, or what is the perceived state of the system, but rather what is expected to be the state of the system in the future. Because investment spending, for example, you don't see the results right away. So you have to guesstimate, hey, am I going to be able to sell the widgets that I make in my new manufacturing facility that'll come online 4 years from now, or whatever the case may be. So if there's animal spirits, you go ahead and you build the new facility. And if there's pessimism and the animal spirits disappear, no good. So getting a handle on that. And of course, Keynes wrestled with that in the general theory. He talked about his the beauty contest in chapter 12 and all that. So getting a handle on expectation modeling is very important. I think in the future there's going to be AI solutions in our macro models and whatever. But for now, I think the adaptive expectations structure that was widely used by Milton Friedman and others, Bill Phillips even, needs adjustment. And that's, you get into the trend stuff and whatever. So we've done a lot of work in system dynamics on that. I have a paper in our book on feedback economics where I fit the structure, the expectation structure to human expectations data from Glenn Grimes, who at the time was America's foremost agricultural commodity price forecaster. He was an agricultural economist at the University of Missouri, and he had a radio program and a newsletter, and all the farmers tuned into what he had to say. And what happened was, well, back up just a bit. I was asked to referee a paper for the Journal of Economic Behavior and Organization, and the question was, who does a better job at forecasting commodity prices, Glenn Grimes or the futures market in Chicago? And so I refereed the paper, and I noticed in the appendix there was data on what Glenn Grimes thought or expected, like hog prices were going to be 1 quarter in advance, and then what they actually were. And so, there's the book there. There's a chapter, I forget what it is, 17 or something in there that presents this. So I said, hey, I've got data on human expectations. And so I formulated an expectation structure, kind of, my version of what's in the system dynamics literature. And there's 2 aspects to the structure that are really worth noting. One is that it does not have steady state error. So a traditional adaptive expectation structure that is widely used in economics, under certain circumstances, will have steady state error. So you got to get rid of that. Number 2, it is consistent with Kahneman and Tversky's, they're 2 psychologists, work on anchoring and adjusting. So Kahneman and Tversky did a lot of work. They're 2 psychologists. Tversky's passed. Daniel Kahneman's at Princeton now. Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in economics for his work, and the Nobel Committee said we would give it to Amos Tversky if he were still alive, but they don't give it posthumously. But they worked on, how do people make their decisions in the face of uncertainty? And among the things they do is they anchor and adjust. So my structure is consistent with anchoring and adjusting. It doesn't have steady state error. And if I got it to fit very nicely to Glenn Grimes's expectations data. And so I think getting expectations correct in a model, the sort of work that Ty and I are doing and Steve is doing, I think is one important contribution we can make. And we don't want to put in, let's say, an expectation structure with steady state error that gives us some goofy results. So we got to, test for that and make sure what we're doing is tight with respect to good modeling practice. So
I have so for a long time, I have wanted to actually buy feedback economics, but I haven't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to buy it. I can't really see my phone. It is a big book, so it's got some expense to it. It's $152. So I'm going to buy it, and then I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to give it. I'll have a contest on this live stream, maybe in a couple months when I'm done going through it and photocopying it and stealing all the ideas out of it and somehow making my own ideas and capitalizing on those ideas later in the future. Place order. I'm going to do verifying credit card. Oh, it loves to verify. That's the part it loves. I have confirmed.
Yeah.
And I'm going to give it away in a contest. So we'll give this book away. This is going to be my first book contest on the live stream. I just developed the idea here. I don't know why.
So another along these lines of what would be, chunks of structure stock flow feedback loop structure that would be important for economic modeling would be resource allocation. So a very common issue in really any system dynamics problem is I have a finite resource, time, people, money, whatever the case may be. And I got competing demands for my time, for my money, for my person power. How do I want to allocate my resource? And there's all sorts of applications for this, and there's all different ways of doing it. One way I like to use is, again, Nobel Prize winning work in economics from Daniel McFadden. And we will often use that framework for resource allocation. It's funny, not so much anymore. And actually, a lot of these people have passed away. But back in the day, someone would pose a question on a system dynamics discussion board. Hey, how do I do the following? And some prominent SDer would weigh in, oh, you do it this way. Then the next day, some other prominent modeler would say, I don't agree with that. I think you should do it this way. That other formulation has this problem. Then the third person would weigh in, we are both wrong. I would do it this way. And suddenly all these luminaries are weighing in on the best way to do something. And it's fascinating, including Forrester would weigh in sometimes. And it's fascinating to see the sort of the mental models of these very veteran, highly intelligent, well-known modelers weighing in how to represent something. Of course, almost any formulation is going to have its strengths and weaknesses, so you can always pick on something. But resource allocation is one of those. Attractiveness is another one of those. An attractiveness of a product, of a city, place to go. How do you properly model that? So economists traditionally would model attractiveness with gravity models. Again, they're trying to be physicists. So like the laws of gravity are pulling you to a city or something. And system analysis has said, well, we get that, but there's a better way. We do it this way. And of course, the second you're not using the economist technique, they reject what you're doing. But some of these concepts are fundamental to doing good systems, and they have applicability all over the place. And we call these things generic structures. In Stella, they're called assemblies. In Vensim, they're called molecules, different names for different, but they're well-known, highly tested ways to do something as a part of a system dynamics model. And these can be very useful. Even if you modify them to fit your situation, you have some starter dough to get you going, as opposed to just staring at a blank screen going, how the hell do I do this?
Anybody has ideas for how I'm going to give away this $150 book I just bought, put it on my Patreon underneath this video, put it underneath this video on YouTube, put it in the chat, give me some ideas. I don't know how I'm going to give it away now. I'm going to read it first, so it's not going to be brand new. I'm not going to give you a brand new fucking book. Okay.
Coffee stains,
yeah.
chocolate fingerprints, cookie crumbs in the.
But that just adds some character to the book, right? So, anyways, give some ideas on how we can do that. Got another question here, and I'm going to give it to Mike because this is outside of my knowledge base. How come I don't hear much explanation and talk about Truffan's dilemma, the Cantillon effect, Grisham's law as far as explaining monetary theory? Does the math neoclassicals use debunk these? Thanks. Mike?
When you say you don't hear much from us or in general, or
I think in general.
Yeah. I'll put that in the I don't know bucket. Certainly you'll hear about a somewhat obscure or less widely known concept, often going back X years, even X centuries, depending on what we're talking about. Verdun's law or what, all these things that when somebody finds a need for it, they throw it up there and whatever. So I don't per se think it has anything to do with neoclassical economics. Explain monetary theory. Yeah, Gresham's law. That's a good one. I don't know. I just think not that many people use the tools we use. And let me state it differently. The types of people, this is my experience, the types of people who are good at using the types of tools that Ty and I and Steve use are not typically trained in economics. They might have had an econ course or two in college or something, but they're not economists, because it takes more than just taking an econ class or two to become a professional economist, including being socialized into the profession, going to econ meetings, professional meetings, and having coffee with other economists, and the whole journal thing and everything. There's a whole thing that happens that's outside of the textbooks as well as what's in the textbooks. And then those who are professionally trained as economists don't use the tools we use, right? And they might not therefore need per se in any situation to use some of these laws. So maybe the neoclassical approaches doesn't have to utilize these or look at these concepts, dilemmas, effects, laws, and whatever. So somebody like myself, who is trained to the PhD level in economics, but also, I guess you'd say, to the PhD. I already have my PhD, so I don't have a formal credential, but I took all the PhD classes at MIT from Forrester and Sturman and all that. So what does that make me? I'm not sure, but I'm highly trained in system dynamics, and I have a PhD in economics. That's not common. That's a very unique set of, Venn diagram. The number of people who can say that is very small in the world. $2 in that'll get me a cup of coffee at the corner cafe. Like, so what? But it's just I have a unique set of skills. And I find that, really good SDers who have an interest in economics and have had a couple courses, they're not really trained as economists, they don't have a deep understanding of the profession and whatever, and vice versa. So, but these are all research topics. I mean, we should look into this stuff.
Graham thanks that $5 British, which is about $9 Canadian. It'll go towards buying that book. It definitely will. I don't know. Luckily, I put that on my personal credit card, so Marie's not going to see that. But she is not going to be interested in me buying $150 books.
So sidebar. So some years ago, I was buying a new compound bow at Cabela's and some Targets and whatever. So I had two shopping carts full of crap. One was I had a big Target in one of the carts. It took up the whole cart. So they see me wheeling this towards the counter, and the archery guys go, "Hey, you need some help getting this to your car?" And I go, "I can. Yeah, it'd be cool. I can manage, but it's cool." And then I make the joke. I said, "I'm going to have to sneak this into my house in the dark of night so my wife doesn't see it." And the one guy goes, "Oh, I just hide my stuff in my trunk." And the other guy goes, "I hide my stuff in the garage." So husbands around the world, use these techniques.
I don't think this is the same book online. If it is, I'm really upset because I just spent 150. But the feedback method of teaching macroeconomics, is it effective? David Wheat is part of the SD community, but it is not the same book.
No. David has some stuff in the book, at least one chapter in the book that I can remember.
In the book you did the feedback
in the book you just purchased, David has at least one chapter. He might have more than that. I can't remember, but yeah.
And didn't Steve have a little piece in there as well?
Yeah, so I'll give you a story on that. So some years ago, Steve wrote a paper in which he argued that Sir John Hicks' multiplier accelerator model, it's known in economics as the Samuelson-Hicks multiplier accelerator model, was terrible, and he explained why, and then he fixed it, if you will. The story is that Sir Roy Harrod helped Keynes write the general theory. In some sense, he was a member of the circus. He was younger than Keynes. He would go to Cambridge and listen to Keynes lecture about a chapter of the general theory, and they'd write letters back and forth and whatever. And after Keynes died, Harrod became his biographer because he knew Keynes so well. So Harrod said, well, Lord Keynes was interested in the cycle. We're in the Great Depression. How do we, why did it happen? And how do we get out? But Herod, I'm going to generalize Keynes's general theory to the long period, the trend and the cycle. And in 1939, he produced a paper where he claimed he did that. Well, mathematically, he had a trend, exponential growth, but his cycle was in words. But when you read his words, it seemed like he talked about a knife edge or a razor's edge, that he defined the circumstances under which Herod did, where you'd get a golden age growth path, which is as the labor force, which was the same as the population back then, these little models, as the labor force, the population grew exponentially, the economy grew exponentially such that everybody always had a job and it was in a steady state. And that's called a golden age growth path. So that's Herod's first problem, an existence problem. Does your growth model have a golden age? And his did. But his second problem is stability. If you get shocked or knocked off the golden age path, what happens? Herod seemed to say that you would fall farther and farther away because the entrepreneurs would keep investing the wrong amount and keep pushing the system away from the golden age. It wouldn't return. And Herod's like, no, that's not what I mean. There's a cycle there. And everybody's going like, well, dude, we're reading your words and it looks like you're. And so Herod spent the rest of his life trying to say he never said there's a knife edge. Even now it's in all the textbooks. It's sometimes called the razor's edge. And he died sad that this thing he claimed he never said was in all the textbooks. That's what he's known for and whatever. So Sir John Hicks, 10 years later in 49 said, hey, I'm going to fix this stupid model of Herod's because if it has a knife edge, it just breaks down. So I'm going to switch from continuous time to discrete time. And I'm going to add lags. The missing ingredient is lags, said Hicks. So he changed it from a continuous time model to a discrete time model, and he roughly reproduced Samuelson's multiplier accelerator model. They're not identical, but they're very similar. So that model now is known as sort of the Samuelson-Hicks multiplier accelerator model. Both of those models could produce a trend or a cycle, but not a trend and a cycle. And Hicks's model has other problems as well. And so Steve took a look at that and he said, this stinks and I'm going to do something about it. So Steve produced a nice fix to Hicks's model, but he still hated it because it was in discrete time. But still, he presented his fix. I thought it was very nice. And I got the paper to referee. Now, it was anonymous, but sometimes when you're in the peer review process, people get papers if they're known to have expertise in a niche. And sometimes when you're in that niche, there's only so many people in the niche and you know what everybody's working on. So I had already seen the paper, even though it was anonymous, but I was asked to referee it. So I gave it a big thumbs up. I thought, this is wonderful. And the editor said, I don't care what you said, Mike, I'm not publishing it. I hate it. So I argued and argued and argued to publish the paper and they wouldn't do it. So when we started working on feedback economics years ago, I contacted Steve and I said, why don't we finally publish that paper? So that's what he did. Although he said, I can't bring myself to fully do a discrete model. So he changed it, which that's fine. But we finally gave it an outlet. And Steve argues, and I think he's right, that because that Samuelson-Hicks multiplier accelerator model is so well known, and it could only do the trend or the cycle, you had a split in macroeconomics between business cycle theory and growth theory, because you couldn't do the trend and the cycle together. They didn't know how to do that back then. And again, path dependent. Then you write textbooks and you teach classes and then you're not looking, as Koletsky would say, at the trend and the cycle being the pesiste resistance of macroeconomics, right? They're separated, right? So I don't know if that's true, but that's what Steve used to blame it on. Sir John.
I didn't know he was covering that a few weeks ago. Because like the DSGE model I'm doing, I'm trying to. I look at these old, I guess the new Keynesian model is the model right now, but I look at these models, old models, I look at them as like classic cars and I'm restorating them in system dynamics. I know it's kind of arrogant of me to say it that way. And I find I like doing that. I like looking at the DSG model in the system dynamic form, and I can see its causal structure a little bit better. Anyways, I have this accelerator multiplier model. And one of the issues is it doesn't grow. I can generate cycles out of it. I can generate explosive cycles or decreasing cycles to an equilibrium or continuous cycles. And so I added a population that grows, the worker population. I have right now a constant labor productivity. And I'm trying to make that model into a growth cycle, oscillating business cycle model. It's another side project that I'll probably never finish. And Steve was like, "Oh, you don't want to. Don't waste your time on that crap." And I sent him this DSG model a few days ago by email. And all I got back, he usually always has a nice reply for me. All I got back was an emoji with where he covers his face and one eye's looking out like this. I'm like, oh, I've upset. I put a DSG model into Steve's Ravel software. He is gonna disown me.
Yeah, I one of my colleagues when I was teaching at Notre Dame told me that when he turned in his first draft of his dissertation proposal, he got it back from his dissertation director who had taken a red marker and wrote in giant letters, "Try again," across the front page and handed it back.
What else we got in the chat? If you got questions.
There was a question Thomas asked about ideology of the editor. Publication was denied. I think it was because it was a discrete time thing, is my guess. Not 100% sure. Was never get. All I heard was I don't like it. The editor. It was an associate editor, and it's refereeing. The peer review process is tricky. It's also a racket. Let me throw this out there for consumption. So, if you send an article to a journal, there's a couple of ways it usually gets rejected. With the ink is barely dry on the envelope, and they'll reject it. Number one is if they have a style page and you don't follow it, they're going to say, this guy doesn't bother to even check out our style page. And because they got to weed out however many articles they get, right? But secondly, and more importantly, the editor is going to say, well, my readers care about this. So if you're sending an article on skateboards and jelly, but you send it to the International Journal of Peanut Butter and Hula Hoops, they're going to say, our readers want to hear about peanut butter and hula hoops, not jelly and skateboards. So send it to the International Journal of Jelly and Skateboards. So, because obviously they want people to subscribe to their journal, read their articles, and all that stuff. So you can get rejected right away out of the box for stuff like that. But let's say the article passes the first smell test. Editors like to see that you're citing their other articles from their journal as well. That's one that they probably won't admit very much that they do that. But if you're like, oh, you're obviously not bothering to read my journal, but you want me to publish your article in my journal, eh? So, some of this it's a racket. So, but let's say it passes a smell test. Out to the referees it goes. Okay, now the referees are going to come back. They're almost never going to say, just publish it. It's beautiful. It's perfect. That's rare. It happens, but it's rare. Usually, here's a list of 10 things from each referee that need to be addressed. The editor will look through it and say, yeah, this one, yeah. Then they'll communicate with the author. Okay, here's what referee number 1 says. Here's what referee number 2 says. Don't worry about number 5 from referee number 1, and don't worry about number 7 from referee number 2. I, the editor, am saying don't worry about that. But the other stuff. So if you want to continue the process, you've got to address each and every one of the referee's comments. Even if you say, I disagree with referee number 2's comment number 3, you have to say why and make your argument. But you can't just blow it off. If you blow it off, so then sometimes there's a round 2. Usually the referees will go, okay, the guy, I asked him to do all these things. He did them. I'm not going to turn around and reject it now. I said, revise and resubmit. The guy did it, unless there's some egregious errors or something like that. No, so usually that's it. Now, refereeing, you're almost, I don't think I've ever heard of anybody being paid. It's a service to your profession. But But here's the thing. If you referee for an editor and do a good job, when you submit something to that editor, not saying anything that's junk can get published, but the editor is going to give you, a second or third look and say, hey, this guy has scratched my back. I'm going to try and scratch his back or her back because this person has refereed for me and done a good job. So I'm going to try and help him out. So they don't say that, but that's part of the racket. The other thing is sometimes a referee will just say, nah, don't publish it. I hate this. And give a few reasons, even if the reasons are weak. Sometimes the referees are well known in their field. They're not assistant professors right out of grad school. They're veteran. The editor might disagree with the referees. Say like, yeah, that referee was watching TV or something while he was reading his paper because I just don't see but if you overrule your referees, and if you do it more than once, what's going to happen next time you ask? Because they're not paid. They're going to say, F you. You overrule me. Why am I going to bother? Right now, because it's hard to get referees. People won't, it's thankless work, right? So it's a whole racket is what I'm getting at. And so why was Steve's paper rejected by the associate editor? And I just said, I really want it. And so he's overruling me. I actually know, I don't want to say names. I know very well who the associate editor was. And I really liked the guy and he did me solids on, so I was like, all right, fine. And I'll still referee for you. I'm not going to, but if it were a different circumstance, I might say, well, then screw you. I'm not refereeing. Don't send me anything anymore. I'm not refereeing for you, because so it's a racket. I mean, it's science. Don't get me wrong. You can't just throw any crap out there, but there's a whole lot of other stuff that goes on in getting these things in print.
Are there solutions to addressing those issues? Because I find that frustrating to hear. I like it, I have a paper and I'm already thinking, well, I have a journal that I want to submit it to. And I'm thinking, well, it's time to really search that journal and start citing some papers from that journal in my next edit. Is there a solution to that? Because that sounds kind of problematic. I know these are smart people doing the double blind refereeing, but it seems like there's some problematic issues.
Yeah. So what I tell my doctoral students is that, hey, economists organize themselves for better or for worse into schools of thought. You got your new Keynesians, your post-Keynesians, your Austrians, your monetarists, your orthodox Keynesians, your Marxists, your behavioral, whatever. And they all have their own conferences, their own journals, their own discussion boards. They swap doctoral students. They invite you to speak and you invite them to speak. They use your textbook. I use their textbook. So, there are these clumps of economists who all know one another and sort of do the same thing and they usually have a journal, maybe two. And so I always tell them, you got to find your people. Don't tell me you're in 8 or 9 schools of thought or something. You want to be so I hang with the post-Keynesians, the institutionalists, and the SDers. And that's more than enough for me, right? And those are your people. And you can start out by saying, hey, I'll referee for you, right? I want to learn how to referee. Send me your stuff and maybe I'll work with Steve or Mike or somebody and just to take me through the referee. I actually have my graduate students referee purposely to learn how to do it. And then you've refereed for them. They know you a little bit, right? And you just get in that community and then you know what they're looking for in terms of their journal articles. And more importantly, the audience of those journals will value what you do. Again, if you send, let's say your article on peanut butter and hula hoops does get published for God knows what reason in the Journal of Jelly and Skateboards. Will anybody care about your article? Will anybody cite it? More importantly, will they put it on their syllabus so their students will read your work? I think that's more important than a citation. It's, hey, is somebody taking your paper and assigning it to their graduate students, irrespective if they cite it or not in their paper? Because that says a lot that they want their youngins to learn your stuff, that you're influencing the next generation and so forth, right? So, you got to find your community, your people, and you go to conferences, you meet them, you meet the editor, you say, I'm Joe Blow, I'm new to the field, here's what I'm doing. Would you be interested in a paper? I'm working on this paper. Would you be interested in seeing it? I'm happy to referee for you. This sort of thing. And then you get into the club. Sounds like it's not sciencey, and it's not. There's a sociology of science as much as there's the math, the proofs, the data, all that crap that goes on in this whole. And as there used to be just a handful of econ journals 100 years ago or whatever it was. Today, there's a gazillion of them, and they're always making new ones. I get asked all the time, the Journal of XYZ somewhere in Asia, and the editor is a Chinese name or something. And it's like, can I send them something? I'm like, I've never even heard of you, So it's been diluted more and more, right? So you got to find your people. Who are your people? That's Steve is your people. Well, where does Steve publish? Where does he, like post-Keynes? Oh, you're a post-Keynes. Oh, there's two journals of post-Keynesian economics. Louis Philippe or Paul Davidson's. I don't know who's running it now, but I mean, they're kind of rival. Maybe they don't care. Maybe you don't care. But, who are your people? Journal of Economic Issues is for the institutionalists, or one of them anyway. System Dynamics Review is obvious. Is there a Journal of Stock Flow Consistent Modeling? I'm not sure, but maybe there's some, you see what I'm saying? There's a handful of places to start getting your stuff in, right? And then, because send it to Econometrica, it'll be sent back. They're like, we don't do this stuff. It's like, thank you, but no thanks. It won't even get, because it's just not what they do. And, you send your article on German authors to the International Journal of French Literature. They're going to go, this is not, we don't do this. Our readers won't care. Right.
You're right about that. There seems to be a problem. I've gotten 2 emails. So I put my working paper out on the repository. So you have like SN, RN, the one that runs on Cambridge. And you start getting emails from these random economic publications. And I got one and then another one the next day. Because I put it on these repositories. And at first I'm like, oh, wow, I'm good. And so I took the name of this journal, and it was a pretty good name. And I searched it and looked on Reddit, looked on Google, and I started learning about predatory journals. And so some journals will have like fees if you want colors in your papers, et cetera, et cetera. And they'll reach out this way. And I found out that there's a list. There's I can't remember this academic, the Brule. He got in trouble, and he basically made a red list of academic journals that are predatory. And that are out there hunting for your working papers to get them in their journals. And these journals are unknown journals, right? You might get like indexed on Google, but outside of that, they're not respectable.
Yeah.
And so there seems to be that whole problem going on. I'm guessing that's not just in economics, that's across all the different fields. I did have one question. I'm sure you haven't refereed for other fields, although you do system dynamics. Is that similar to all the fields with the cliques? For instance, maybe you don't know, maybe you have a friend, but like in physics or engineering, is that as prevalent as it is in economics?
My suspicion is that what I've described is kind of universal, because you don't want to send a paper to be refereed, peer reviewed by somebody who doesn't really know the area. Well, another thing that's very common is if you look at if referee sends you a paper, and let's say it's a legitimate journal, okay, and you just don't have the time, because in the old days, they would just say, can you referee it? In the old days, you used to get the paper and somebody would take an X-Acto knife and sliced out the author anywhere the author's name was. So you had this paper with big chunks cut out of it because it was anonymous. Now they obviously electronically can clean it up where you don't see that stuff. But, and they used to just say, can you referee it? And you'd say yes or no. Today, they'll say, can you referee it? And you have until this date. And if you can't do it by this date, then we'll ask somebody else. But if you have to decline for whatever reason, like I don't really know the topic, kind of sounds like I do, but I really don't. I don't have the time, or I don't have the time to your constraint. I would have the time over Christmas break. I can't do it right now, but you want it done in the next 3 weeks. I can't do it. For whatever reason, when you decline, the courtesy is to suggest 1 or 2 or 3 other people who might be able to do it. Because the editor is often like, Jesus, I got to find somebody here who knows the area, and they may or may not know somebody who knows the area, right? So if it's the Journal of Economic Issues and it's anything with system dynamics or simulation, I get it because they know Radzicki does, So, so the courtesy is to help the editor, if you can't do the refereeing, find somebody who's competent to do it and might be able to do it in the time frame. And they really appreciate that. So it's not a strike against you if you can't do it, because they prefer you do it. That's why you're getting, but you're going to help them find somebody to do it, right? But I think it's a generic problem. It really is. And the whole peer review process is a thing. It really is. And so what I try and do when I peer review is there's a first cut, which is it appropriate for the journal? Like, will the readers care? Are we aligning here? It's something about Mars and it's a journal about Jupiter. It's just not, so, is it not appropriate at all for the journal it might be a wonderful paper, just not appropriate for the journal. Does it make that first cut? I looked through it. Is it all goofy where figures are all over the place? You can't decipher what the hell's going on. Then it's like, look, I can't even read this thing. It's all over the place. But if it passes those 2 tests, I try and to rarely just out and out reject the paper. I usually give the authors things to do. There might be 20 things to do, very specific, but it's like, hey, rewrite it. But here's some guidance on how to, in other words, I'm not just saying yes or no, we'll let it in the door. I'm trying to help the author make their paper better. That's a good referee. See, but that's a lot of work. Not only to read it that carefully and be thoughtful about but then you got to write it up in a manner where they understand what the hell you're trying to tell them to do. Because the worst thing is, I don't know what the referee wants me to do here. It's like, so good refereeing is a lot of work. It really is. I can count on like one hand the number of papers I've read where I'm like, this is a joy to read. I've learned something. I didn't have to work at all to understand what they were clear as a bell. Boom, 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 boom. And I don't really have much to say other than publish it. It's wonderful. Like I can think of 2 or 3 papers tops in my whole 45 years of doing this stuff where it was like that. Normally it's like, okay, I got to decide what the hell is this guy trying to do here? And, and if they're not a native English speaker, assume it's English language journal. Okay, there's that issue. They're trying their best to express themselves. And I have sympathy if I was trying to write in French or something. God help the poor French guy reading it, so I understand, but still the referee is struggling trying to understand what's going on. One thing I did, we had a very mathematical paper years ago that we submitted to Econometrica and it was rejected. Still have it, but I made 2 versions of it. It had a bunch of mathematical proofs in it. I was doing theoretical econometrics with my dissertation director back in the day. And I made two versions. One was for the journal itself, with proofs. A lot of times steps are skipped for space. Even back then, space considerations. We can't have a 45-page paper in here with every single friggin' line of the proof in it. But then I said version for referees, and I had every frickin' step of every frickin' proof laid out to help the referees. Right, thinking, hey, this author's doing me a solid here. I don't have to try and, he skips 15 steps in between number 2 and equation 2 and equation 3. And now I, the referee, got to figure that out. Here, it's all laid out for me, right? So again, that's, you're doing a solid for the referee saying, hey, referee, I'm helping you here. Maybe you help me, bit of a racket.
We got another. Okay, Graham, you paid me money today, so let's do your question. What do you think it will take for the majority to realize that economics, what never set in stone, but has always evolved and made plenty of mistakes on the way can now be modeled correctly? Mike?
That's a great question. So I've been arguing the econ profession is a path-dependent system that's kind of locked into its ways of doing things. So how do you pry a path-dependent system out of its situation in which it's locked into? I think it's a crisis. If it's business as usual or minor, this is or that's, no. It has to be some sort of major thing that pries people out of their old ways of doing stuff, and so what will that take? Some kind of Great Depression or what have you, I guess, worldwide economic disaster, something like that, I suppose, would get people really thinking like, hey, we got to do this differently. The other thing, so we get into Thomas Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, right? Where Kuhn studied it for physics, but I think it holds where you have normal science, where people are just puttering along, following the traditional paradigm. And there are anomalies that arise that, my theory can't explain this, my theory can't explain that, but, there's little epicycle fixes that are added and it plods along. But at some point, the accumulation of anomalies, things that the theory just can't explain, along with a brand new way of looking at things, can cause a scientific revolution. And everybody kind of switches over like Keynes. But I think like with Keynes, it was the Depression, right? It wasn't, he just wrote the book for the hell of it, the general theory, and everybody switched. It was, hey, we got this thing we can't explain, the Great Depression, right? The classical model of that era of the 1920s and 30s said you only can be stuck in equilibrium at full employment. Well, the economy was stuck year after year during the Great Depression. It was a double dipper, as Steve will point out to you, but still, even then, it was the second dipper was still bad. Well, how can we be stuck with all this unemployment? How could we can be in equilibrium? It can't be right. There has to be a new way of thinking about it. And it was such a bad thing. It pried people out of or people were open to a new way of thinking about things. So I think it's going to take some sort of crisis. And then you need a textbook, you need materials. So, okay, you can't beat something with nothing. Okay, the old way sucks, but there's nothing new. You got to be armed and ready to offer another way of doing it, I think. And we have some of that right now, right?
Yeah, I would tend to agree. If you look now, there is one, like the marginalist revolution didn't come out of crisis per se, but it was maybe an intellectual crisis of answering something. But generally, Keynesian economics came, I would say, out of the Great Depression. Neoclassical economics came out of the energy kind of crises. Now, whether that was the proper response or not, that's another story. I think it's yet to be judged how we look at the 2010s and COVID, what comes out of it. I think it's too early to judge historically. Even for 2008, there's lots of critiques to go around, and there's been responses from the new Keynesians for sure on trying to adjust their models, but there hasn't been I would say, a paradigm shift. But it'll be interesting, let's say in 10 or 15 years, how it all shakes out, how the field adjusts to the 2010s, which was caused by 2008, a decade of low inflation, low growth. And then, the pandemic definitely was a shift. It'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out.
Yeah, I think with AI, robotics, the energy demands and all that, there's going to be some kind of big, excuse me, structural change in the system, right? And that will require analysis, and whether or not, can the traditional stuff be used to do the analysis? Probably not. Can our stuff be used to address it? Maybe. Forster always said a number of things. One was, to me, he'd always say, why are you writing for other economists? He goes, they don't care about the economy. They care about writing articles for other economists. He said, And I said, well, I have to get tenure and promotion at my school. I can't just not publish in journals. That's what they expect. And he said, well, Jay, I write for the business community and the general public. And he said, I addressed all my urban dynamics, world dynamics, all that stuff to the educated citizen, the business community. He says, they'll listen to you. They don't care about the economics profession. And I said, well, there's, I think, some merit to that, just try and, sort of bypass the profession. And, you talked about Jay did urban dynamics in 1968, 69. And here you were talking about it earlier today, right? So, it stood the test of time, right? And so, maybe that's a way to do it, is just bypass the economics profession and just say, hey, they're doing alchemy or whatever the hell they're doing. And we're doing, simulation science or, whatever we want to call it, as socioeconomic simulation science, whatever. And we're listened to. Hey, we got these influential books. We're being invited to testify before Parliament or Congress or something. And the other ones are still, making their buggy whips while we're, working on our robotic flying cars or something, whatever. So maybe that's the way to do it, is bypass the economists entirely and just go to other folks and bring our stuff there.
So just thinking, Jay Forrester, you can find his lectures on YouTube, all the ones that he were recorded. And there was one, and of course, this is back in the day where they had, I don't even know what they're called anymore, and I'm 42 years old. I had them in school where the teachers, what do they call those projectors where they put the clear paper down in it?
Overhead projectors.
The overheads.
Used them for many years.
He's talking in his very official voice about nonlinear feedbacks, and he puts the clear paper on his overhead, and then he has his pointer stick, and he taps on the overhead projector, and you can hear it in the lecture, and he's so matter of fact on what he's saying. I would suggest anybody that wants to actually learn system dynamics, even though he is a very technical guy, he, in my opinion, is still the best person to describe systems, and listen to one of his old lectures. There are people out there that I can just sit and listen to, and for me, it just kind of personally, I can absorb it for quite a long time. I'm trying to think, for instance, who I don't find is interesting, although I think he's probably as smart or smarter, and I don't want to you might be friends with him, is John Sturman. I can't listen to him for a long time, even though he's covering the same topic, and probably as smart, and maybe even describing it better than Jay Forrester. Jay Forrester was like old grandpa telling a war story, and you could just sit there and listen to him, and he is a pleasure. If we're living here in the 2020s, he is a pleasure and refreshing to go back and listen to that old school style of lecture. And I would suggest anybody watching this live stream, go YouTube him right now, watch one of his presentations. He's just a blast to listen to, and his delivery is so matter of fact. Obviously the feedback loop is right here, and I'll tap my overhead so you understand I'm talking about this loop here. Good times. Anyways,
yeah, Jay was cool. He really influenced my thinking. There's just a handful of people and books over my career where I said they really had me rethinking things. And certainly Jay is probably number one, the most influential. There are a couple others who really impacted my thinking, but that's certainly
the first book. Okay, so I watched Steve for a couple years, so I just watched his online lectures on stocks and flows and a couple normal feedback loops. But the first serious book I ever read on system dynamics was by Jay Forrester, and it's a very badly edited book, and the graphs are hand drawn, and it's called Principles of Systems. And it was the first one, and very easy, even though it gets into dynamic systems, very easy to follow along. It's a technical book, it's not a narrative, But I would suggest that book as one of your entry level reads into system dynamics. Maybe I'm wrong, Mike. Maybe you have way better books. Obviously, Business Dynamics by John Sterman is basically a Bible on using system dynamics in the business community. But yeah, Principles of Systems was a good book. I love World Dynamics more than I like The Limits of Growth, because it was a technical book on how to build the World 2 model, the predecessor to World 3. I like that. It gave a narrative, but it gave the technicals at the same time. Urban Dynamics is pretty cool. One that I have, but I haven't read yet, is the first one. It's Industrial Dynamics, and I believe it's actually a bunch of separate different models.
It's the beer game. It's a retailer, wholesaler, distributor, and factory, a supply chain, and it's really good. It's still very insightful to this day. A good one for going from one stock, one flow to a ever bigger models is Introduction to Urban Dynamics by Alan Graham and Lou Alfeld. It's real good because they said people are not understanding urban dynamics and they're beating up Jay over it and they don't understand what's going on. So we'll write a book that will take the reader from one stock and one flow all the way up to, they call it the Urban 2 model, that then you can then read urban dynamics more effectively. But that's a good one for learning how to model. Another good one is Richardson and Pugh, their 1980 book on Introduction to System Dynamics Modeling with Dynamo. It's in Dynamo, but still it's step by step. Jim Linus's book on corporate modeling is real good. It does the same thing sector by sector, taking you through. So yeah, there's some good stuff. A lot. System dynamics community is small, but by and large, the people in it are very, very, very good. Certainly the top people, and like world-class, outstanding people. So, that's the good news.
Anyways, we're at the top. We managed to get through 2 hours. I made a mistake, and I didn't usually put this on my Twitter earlier, and on my Patreon earlier. So I failed you, Mike, in respects that we could have had a bigger audience, and I was kind of lazy and last second this week, but we made it through. We got questions. It was fun. The one thing I learned today that was very interesting to me is that maybe I should cite the papers from the publisher that I want to submit my paper to. Cite some of the papers inside of that. Wink, wink.
This is
interesting. So there's always in our live streams, whether it's you, Mike, or Steve, and Dave Folks, he tells me something about swimming in Britain. I'll learn something from him. Always take something away, and I hope everybody else does at least take one thing away from these live streams. But anyways, till next week, see you later.
You are now relearning economics.